So we at Neogen Homes have been doing a lot of duplex developments, and given the changes that are coming with what Chris Mintz has just announced, that a lot of duplexes are possible in all R2 sites, I think it's going to be time where a lot of clients now start to get into duplex development. And I thought one of the things that we should talk about is, what do people need to go through if they want to do a duplex on an R2 block? So, I think we start from the start. You want to talk through essentially kind of what the pathway is. If you have a site, do you know if it's duplex possible or not? So if you're a mum and dad and you've just got a block, what are you thinking? How do you do that? How do you do that initial assessment?
Yeah, it's a question we get like really, really often. And one of the main things that you get asked is, can I do a duplex? How quickly can I get it done? How do I get approvals? And the main two ways to do that are through a DA or a development application, which goes through council. And the other way is through a complying development certificate or a CDC application, which up until 2021, I believe, before they brought out the low-rise housing diversity code, we weren't able to do duplexes through that complying development process. So all duplexes had to go through council for a DA, which takes probably the longest possible avenue that you could go down. And if there's a way to do it through CDC, which essentially is through your certifier and through a team of consultants that you have control over, whereas you don't have that level of control with councils, then it's a way to definitely go down.
So say, for example, if you, I own a site, right? I'm a typical mum and dad investor. I own a site. What's the first thing do I need to look at to make sure whether my site is duplex permissible or it's not?
Yeah, so first thing we check, and I would suggest checking, is knowing the zoning of your block and the size of that block.
Yep.
And then cross-referencing that with council's LEP, which is the local environment plan, and it'll tell you in their land use table if it's permitted under that land zoning. Then the second thing you'd want to check is the minimum lot size,
which always catches
zoning.
So many people out.
Yeah, correct. And then there's for CDC, there's that minimum frontage of 15 meters, and there's a bunch of other things that you need to check, such as your setbacks of neighboring blocks, your frontage, where your existing pillars are in terms of electrical, servicing, utilities, NBN. But from just a strictly planning perspective, they're the things that you want to start off at. Now, you mentioned the Min's government. Everyone's been talking about it.
Yeah, we're getting excited about it.
Yeah, they've been talking about this missing middle for a long time. We've seen it, we've followed the news, and they tried to, state tried to fix that issue of the missing middle housing back in 2021 when they brought out this code, this low-rise housing diversity code that allows us to do duplexes. Now, what happened was council, through planning loopholes, was able to
push back on it. Yeah.
And in some councils it wasn't, on paper it was allowed, but a lot of blocks weren't actually meeting that minimum lot size, which you still need to comply with in the LEP.
And I think something similar, probably not to that same extent, but I know there'll probably be some sort of loopholes or something.
For sure. There's going to be some button heads with the state and council, 100%. But
overall,
what I'm really excited about, and I'm sure you are, is just conceptually how many more lots there could potentially be dual occupancy or duplex permissible under R2, because what state is saying is, hey, we're going to allow duplexes in all R2 zones across all councils. Now they're working through all the details of how they implement that, and there will be an exhibition period. But the main thing we're interested in knowing is, are they going to potentially decrease that minimum lot size, and then otherwise that loophole could still stand. So yeah, that's something just to keep your eyes on.
But it does open up the pathway for a lot now of houses to turn, and potentially,
absolutely.
especially if you own land now, doesn't matter all over Sydney, but in particular in Western Sydney, this opens up so many opportunities now where those blocks previously could have been ruled out now can be potentially duplex. So when you go through a duplex process, so we're doing a series now on Instagram which kind of talks about the steps and the journeys, but I think this will be a good conversation to have. So if you've never done a duplex before, what is the first step? Let's say you have a site which, you've either come to us or you've done your own due diligence, that it ticks essentially the duplex ticks.
Planning boxes.
Yeah, the planning boxes. What's the next step? What does it look like when you say you have a lot? Now, what's the next step?
Yeah, so CDC, the thing about it is it's very rigid. The rules are black and white. If you don't meet all the requirements, then you essentially are forced to go down the DA route. So
which we always advise against, unless it's case for case, but most of the time, if you can get away with the CDC, why not do a CDC?
So you'd need to check, your contract of sale for a slew of things, but the most frequent ones that need to be checked are your bushfire attack levels.
Yep.
It needs to be below a bowel level of 29.
Yep.
And your flood affection is another thing that if it's above a certain threshold, can preclude you from CDC.
Yeah.
And then there's biodiversity layers as well. And all of these things are we can check for you to make sure that it's permitted. Often we get a town planner to check as well before we purchase our sites.
Yep.
And give you that green light that it's possible. But yeah, they're the top three ones. But there are other things that you need to be mindful of, and you just need to, we need to see the contract of sale. You plan a subdivision, your 88B restrictions, listing out all your covenants. There's a whole bunch of things, but they're those main ones that you can do on the desktop, and then see if it's possible.
So let's say it ticks all the boxes, then you essentially can move on to the design space. What does that entail, the design, when you're designing a duplex?
Yeah, so first we'd probably want to have a high level conversation on your budget or end use. Is it an investor grade product? Are you going to keep one, rent one out, or are you going to sell or rent both of them out?
Yeah.
Incorporate as much of that into the design as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What a lot of people forget is with the duplex, it gives you so much flexibility.
Yes.
So with the duplex project, depending on where you are in your investment journey or where you are in your development journey, a good idea, and I think a rule of thumb, is if you can build it, try and this is always a good start to a property development journey. And I think the best way to do it is you design it with the end in mind. So if you're going to keep one and sell one, the best way to do that is you try and go for that medium finish. So we try and do that strategy thinking with you at the start. And the way we then do that in the design space, even by the time we sell it, we always keep that strategy in mind. But if you are going to keep one, we've had a client previously that is designing his duplex project so he can live in it, and his mum's going to occupy the other side. So that design is obviously going to be a higher end finish. We're going to, there's a lot of emotions attached to it. Whereas some duplex projects we've done for a client, they from the outset you're going to sell it. So when during the design stage you get so emotional and try and design all these funky things, we always try and advise against it, because at the end of the day you're selling it. Don't get emotionally attached. Yeah,
it's so important. And even if you are going to keep it, you've kind of got to draw a line in the sand or be mindful of, which is really hard. Even for us, we've built plenty of houses, and sometimes it's not even our house.
Yeah.
And you get so emotionally attached, and then you want to make a change here or there, and then those things, they do add up, they really do. The way around it is just having a good architect and getting, I cannot emphasize enough, getting a builder's input during the design stage to either reel the client in, reel the architect in, or even just offer insight on constructability, which translates to how quick we're going to be able to build it, and ultimately that's holding costs for the person. So it is a net saving for them. So there's so many things, but it's all just, it comes down to good architect and being mindful of price and having a builder oversee that process. There's no point getting a design completed, then we've walked the job saying, I've got the plans, just lodged it to the certifier. Can I change it to, can I get 3 meter ceilings or 2.7 meter ceilings on both levels? I'm like, not really, not at this stage. But if we were involved at just even earlier, could have been a very easy change. Or one of the things we throw in for free is, your niches as well. Because if you allow for them during the design stage, our detailer details it. And it really isn't a extra cost.
And during that design stage, so essentially, let's say it ticks all the planning boxes, we then get involved, we use our architect team to start designing the house for the client, with the budget in mind, with the strategy in mind. We start working with them for the design. One of the things that I've, having gone through this journey a few times with clients, it's so painstakingly complicated because you're always dealing with so many different consultants. And my advice is, if someone's going off and doing their own development projects, trying to save money by not engaging and working with a builder or engaging and working with an architect, is if you're trying to coordinate and do all of that yourself, it's so bloody complicated. And you can often, by trying to save money up front, you could spend more money because you've either missed something and you're doing reiterations all the time. So, that's also a good thing that, we've always kind of pointed out.
100%. It's
but there's a lot of consultants involved, right? Like, just to name a few, it'll be structural.
So for your, like you said, like there are plenty of architects that will do the project management aspect, get you to your CDC or to your DA. Or if you go through to CC, which is a whole nother topic, they will throw that project management portion in, but they're doing hundreds of these a year. Let's be honest, because it's their livelihood, it's their bread and butter. So sometimes it's really, really difficult even for us to be mindful of all the steps involved that the average mum and dad won't actually know. Like we met a client the other day, you remember, and he was under the impression that his CDC approval is, a week away or 2 weeks away, and that's just because the
doesn't
architect,
know any better.
He doesn't know any better. The architect has 150 other jobs, and the client isn't project managing the architect. So he's got the concept plans done, and he thinks, happy days, I've got a set of architectural plans. Let's give it to a builder. That's all I need. Let's start breaking ground. And we've just pulled him aside and said, look, there's a fair few things that you still need to do, which are just to like, it's not that many, but it's, engaging a sustainability consultant, it's getting a structural engineer, it's getting your hydraulic plans done,
utilities.
It's you want to start thinking about utilities, where your pillars are, especially if you're doing a duplex. You're gonna have to do a upgrade to Endeavour Energy's network. Is there a pillar, within distance, and does that pillar have the capacity? Same thing for Sydney Water, like where's the water mains? None of these things is typically in an architect's scope. So you want to get...
Or a builder scope. This is the grey area, right? This is what we discovered when we were first starting out.
Yeah, that's true. For duplex, it's actually not even in a lot of the builder scope.
Because they'll have it in their inclusions that any works outside the property boundary or even getting up to CDC approvals, not our thing.
Exactly.
That's for you guys to sort out.
We do all of that because my experience is in subdivisions, as you know, 200 lot, 300 lot subdivisions with tier 1 developers. So same process, slightly scaled down, and we will give you a fixed price end to end. Design, CDC, consultants, network upgrades to Sydney Water if required, to Endeavour Energy, NBN. All of that are the things that
And these utility providers are not easy to deal with either.
Mate, ask any plumber. How much they love Gemini, and you won't be able to.
But you've got to challenge it. I know with one of the first duplexes we did, if we didn't push with Sydney Water, we didn't push the boundaries, we didn't come and collaboratively get to an outcome, and we were just taking what they said on first basis, we would have been paying over $100,000 in just network upgrades.
100%. So,
and for the average mum and dad, you know, you feel helpless because if Sydney Water is saying this, which is and it's a utility authority.
Yeah.
Most of the people, and if I hadn't done this before, you know, when we were challenging them, I'd been shit scared. Like, hey, all of a sudden my feasibility is out the door.
Well, you need to know the rules and regulations and to push back and know your rights with Sydney Water, and to do that, it's technical. Like you know, we definitely know something in terms of whether you can do it through the minor works process, major works process, but we rely on a water service coordinator as well, which is another consultant you need to get your building plan approval and then get your CDC approval. Like there's a lot to get your project off the ground. There's a lot to get the project off the ground. It's almost second nature to us. We've done it.
Yeah.
And
they don't teach you this shit anyway. No. Like if I hadn't done this shit before, and you know, I've never gone down the pathway of building a duplex. There's no books on building a duplex in Sydney. There's no, you know, you go to a builder's building the house. You go to an architect's designing the house. But who's bringing it all together?
Yeah.
And you know, it's so complicated.
Yeah, it really is. It's
definitely complicated. You're managing over 10 consultants. Everyone's got their different drivers. You know, and most people have full-time jobs. This is a big project that you're managing, and any detail that you miss will cost you a lot of money. And 100%. So, and this is not just a plug for Neogen, but you know, I think having gone on this journey, just spend the money, get someone on board that will help you manage this process end to end. It just takes, you know, you gotta when you're looking at a project, especially a duplex project, when you do your initial feasibility, factor these things in, factor consultants in, factor your project management costs in. And then if the project is making a lot of money at the end, you know, you've got a 20% ROI, you've got a 15% ROI, then you got to look at that at the end goal. What you're not looking at, and what a lot of people get caught up in, is trying to save $5 here, trying to save $100 here. You know, it doesn't add value because what you're losing in opportunity cost is time.
100%.
You know, that's your time that you could be spending making money elsewhere. Leave it to the experts, and this is passive investment that can do your work for you. So we try and advise that to a lot of clients, and people who have worked with us, I think when they've gone to the end of the journey, have realized the value, and I don't think they'll do it any other way. Yeah,
100%. Like there's no shortcuts, and the biggest thing is you just don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Like just as you're a client, you're building your first house, I guarantee you're gonna build your second or your third, you know, home or investment property, and you're gonna learn so much on the journey through our site walks, being involved in custom floor plans, which is all we do. Like you're gonna learn so much, and you're gonna take that on board, and on the next one you're gonna say, okay, well, I saw this, we designed it on paper. I thought that's what I wanted. It got built, but I wish I just did this one little thing different. All of that insight, or most of that insight, we can provide up front.
Yeah, well, look, we did this for a client where he was wanting to build that duplex where he wants to live in one, his mum's going to live in the other. Sorry, can I just say, the reason
why we can provide it is because we've done it hundreds of times between the three of us.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, 100%. I just think it's invaluable. But that's what I was saying, to your point, like where we did that project for our client, he wanted to live next to his mum, but he also wanted the house to look detached, but he wanted to have the cost savings of an attached dwelling. So we came up with that creative design where, you know, the common wall is attached, but the front looks very detached. So when you're driving past it, it looks like two separate homes, but it is attached by a common wall, and it's hidden behind, you know, in the back end.
You wouldn't know unless you wouldn't
know it.
Yeah, unless you built it, or you're detailed, like you're in the industry, like the architect would know.
Yeah.
Very easily that is the case. But yeah, like driving past, end result is it looks detached.
Yeah. And what happens, so now that we've gone through the process of designing the house, we've dealt with all the consultants, we've got an architectural plan with all the various sub-plans underneath it. What's the next step after that?
So are you saying if we've got the approval at this stage?
No, or before the approval. So how do we get approval from the design? You've got everything.
Yeah.
How do you get approval?
That's a good question. So there's the fun of the planning portal. Every private certifier and every builder and everyone in between absolutely loves this portal. Even councils do. There's a bit of sarcasm in my voice. However, New South Wales government requires everything to be lodged on that portal. That for your CDC approval, and it needs to be approved and issued by your certifier. And often, we'll submit the architectural plans, the structurals, the basics, the hydraulic, sometimes a geotech report, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So that gets submitted, and the certifiers, they've got boxes to tick and to protect themselves. So there's often RFI process involved there, where it may require redrafting certain elements or clarifications with us, with the architect, with the structural engineer, etc., etc. So that usually can take a couple of weeks.
And we've got that good relationship with our certifiers. We've been working with them for a long time. So before it even gets lodged in the planning portal, we're doing a lot of back and forth to make sure that it ticks all their boxes. So it's not taking we're taking all the guesswork out of it.
For sure. Like we're submitting it at the end once they're all satisfied and all that preliminary stuff is done.
Yeah. And what are the fees? So with duplexes, when you're lodging it onto the planning portal, what are the fees in terms of your long service levy, the things that you have to pay council, which always gets people caught out?
That's a very good question. So the fees in a nutshell, in terms of not to your consultants and just to statutory authorities, it would be your long service levy, which goes to state government, and if I remember correctly, it's 0.25% of your construction costs.
Yeah.
So it's probably on average it's about $2.5 to $3,000.
Yeah.
For like your average build roughly, and then you've got your council contribution fees, which is the big one.
Big one.
That people are getting better at accounting for that one, I have to admit, but that's anywhere from 20 to 25 grand. And then there's the new one, which is the state infrastructure contribution, which is I think 11 to 12, between 10 and 12 grand, depending on your strata, whether it's a strata subdivision or a torrent subdivision. And there may be another one in there, but that's why we've got checklists.
Yeah. And this is all these costs we factor into our feasibility as well at the upfront. And it's important to do that, whether to make sure your project stacks up or not.
So you're the numbers guy. Why don't you educate everyone on the hidden GST margin scheme, which is something that everyone forgets about as well?
Yeah. So we've had so many people when they do their own feasibilities, I think they're half baked their feasibility.
Plus your capital gains tax, which people allow for that, but the GST margin.
Yeah, so like a lot of people in their feasibility, I've seen so many incorrect feasibilities where what they try and do is say, I bought the land for X, I paid this much for construction, and I sold it for X first for Y, and all of that money that I've just gained is profit. This all goes back into a pocket. I'm like, it couldn't be further from the truth, right? Because that's not the end of the journey.
Yeah.
With the feasibilities, one of the things, and our feasibility accounts for all of this, you have to make sure that once you get, that's your gross profit.
Yeah.
And to get to that kind of profit number, what you have to do is you have this thing called the GST margin. So GST margin is essentially, let's say you sold your duplex project for 5 million, but you bought the land for 1 million. Yep. You have to pay a GST margin on the price that you sold. So 5 million minus 1 million, 4 million. So you have to pay 11% on $4 million.
On the delta.
On the delta.
Yeah.
And that is something that you pay upon selling. So anytime you sell, and that's not including capital gains tax, which you also incur once you sell the project. So
it's pretty funny.
So when you're looking at your project profitability, ROI at the end of the job, what we're talking about is we need to account for these things.
Yeah.
If you don't account for these things, you may be thinking you're making a profit of 150,000 when you take all these fees and stuff out. You're all of a sudden left with 50 grand, and I'm like, why is this worth it?
If that, 100%, and you're working for 12 to 15 months, including design. Like in this climate at the moment, we've seen a few people's fees go from 7 figures to 6 figures. With the GST
We've seen
margin
some 6 figures go to fucking
ours included.
Yeah, so these are the important things you need to consider before you embark on this journey, because, and also cost blowouts. We've seen that in COVID times. Always factor contingency.
100%.
Because if you don't have contingency, cost blowout happens. You don't want to have, you want to have enough buffer in your profitability that if these unexpected things
100%.
happen, and they are going to happen, right?
Yep.
No project goes according to plan.
No.
If whatever we were doing in the design stage, and when we're talking about it in a perfect world, the end state, we try and keep it as close to the perfect world as possible, but there's always
and there's
movement.
things that you change from paper as well during the build, which like you're not going to capture everything. You might really want to get some ideas and inspiration throughout the process, and you want this implemented, so that requires cost. And if you're doing your own development, if you're an investor or you're a developer, that any bank you go to, your quantity surveyor requires a contingency of 5%, 5 to 7.5, sometimes even 10%, depending on your risk profile. So you should take that those rules of thumb from these commercially savvy experts and implement them on your own projects. Even if you're just doing a duplex, because they work. They know that is what construction is made out of, and it's just the reality. And if the numbers don't stack with those contingency, then your project's shit
go find another project. Or find something else. Just on that point, and we're digressing a little bit, but sometimes you have those sites, but maybe you have a site and maybe just a duplex project isn't possible. What we can also look at is, can we do a duplex with an attached granny flat or with a detached granny flat? Is there ways to do other things on your site? It's good when you're looking for sites, then you can kind of just move on and find another site. But if you already own a site and you're trying to look for the best possible utilization, there's things like that you can do.
So one of the ones that people don't realize, and we didn't realize, is you can do you could theoretically have 4 streams of income if you had purchased the right block, done your due diligence, and we can do that due diligence for you before you buy the block. Make sure it's permissible, because it's a matter of 1 square meter where it no longer is available, permissible. So where you could do 2 duplexes and 2 studios at the back.
And there's so many
4 streams of income that you can get, and it's almost like,
it
sounds too good to be true. But people you just don't know what you don't know.
And look, it's more expensive because you're building an extra 2 units, but at the same time, it's incremental. The value that you get out of it at the end is a lot higher.
100%. And it pay like what is a studio? Like a studio right now will rent for, in the right area, or even a 1 bedroom, you can get $400 for it a week. $400 a week times 2, $800 a week, and then your house is being rented for, let's say, $750 to $800 per week. Add those all up.
Given the affordability crisis, given how many renters are going to enter into the market, this is just a no-brainer. But we'll do a whole series, eventually on looking at different modeling, including financing. How do you finance this? How much do you need to have? Rules of thumbs that we've learnt, which will help clients also when they're looking for financing their duplex projects. How does it work? How much money do you need to have saved up? How can we do all of that? So they're the other things that we can probably go into later on.
100%. There's the planning and the design aspect. Finding a block, which we've pretty much just scratched the surface on. Then there's the the feasibility and the equity side, and how much money you need, and what are the banks doing at the moment. Like, that's a whole nother podcast.
So we'll keep doing this, and the purpose of our podcast, things like this, is educational. It's obviously we do this, and we want to encourage everyone to come to us, even if you're asking for advice. But the main reason for why we're doing this is we looked at this market and said there's no one educating anyone on this process. There's no books available, all the podcasts, all the stuff on YouTube, like Mark Yardney and other people. Like, they're talking about very superficial things like economies.
3 minute clickbaits, and it's just like, it's very strange. It's very strange. Like, because even in the US, you can get some pretty, even on the economy, you get some really good deep dive people, but the Australian podcast industry is in this weird little bubble, and that's the reason why we're just gonna, why we started this. We're gonna go into detail, because people want to know. People actually do want to know this stuff.
Yeah, there is something in between. Like, you don't have to just invest in the inner ring suburbs like most people preach, or go out to Hunter Valley and find, you know, big parcels of land and do duplexes there with a gross uplift of 180,000. Pray to God that it's going to go up in, you know, 5 years, and you're going to be able to, you know, do negative gearing to, you know, there's in between things as well. Like, you know, you can still make money through property development in Sydney. Yeah, you know, in the greater Sydney, there's opportunities in everyone's backyard to do something.
Yeah, you can, and even like if you do your first duplex, you buy one, you sell one, which is what we did. You know, you've essentially at that stage, like, we paid down half the house, half of our loan at the end result, and that was instant. That was on day one.
Yeah,
and people talk about, we still have a loan. But it's like, imagine how long it would have taken you to pay off that 500 grand versus if you just bought bought a regular house, got a conventional loan, 1.2 million at this stage for a house and land package. How long 500 grand going to take you to pay off? At like what our interest rates are now, 6%, 6.5%.
Ridiculous.
You can't do it.
You can't do it.
You got to think outside the box, and that's, you know, got to know your stuff to do that. But
yeah, so we'll keep going with this podcast and with different things.